morning. You're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danie Laurel. It's the start of a new trading day. Let's go straight to our banner story. The budget department has so far released 690.26 billion pesos in funds to bankroll the government's COVID-19 pandemic response programs. As of end September, more than 92% of that total amount, or nearly 638 billion pesos, have been obligated. Additional releases during the third quarter were sourced from the 2021 national budget following the expiration of the funds under the Bayanihan 1 and 2 laws. The funds were used for the payment of special risk allowance of healthcare workers, procurement of test kits, and purchase of vaccine ancillaries, among others. Meanwhile, the Philippine Star reports that the country's pandemic-induced economic losses stood at $43 billion. That's about 2.2 trillion pesos in 2020. The Tokyo-based Japan Center for Economic Research said 15 major economies lost $1.7 trillion last year. China suffered the largest loss, while in Southeast Asia, Indonesia recorded the biggest loss at $154 billion, followed by Thailand at $71 billion. Now, the national government's deficit widened in September as spending outpaced a smaller increase in revenue collection. Data from the Treasury Department showed the fiscal gap expanding by 30% year on year to almost 181 billion pesos. This is government spending jumped by 17%, while state revenues increased by almost 9% on higher tax revenues. In the 9 months to September, the budget deficit reached 1.1 trillion pesos. That is almost 30% higher than the shortfall last year, but it was still 20% lower than the adjusted year-to-date goal. Quick peek on the local unit on the back of that widening budget gap. You can see on my terminal here, the peso trading at 50 spot 6752. The greenback, a little bit of strengthening there in the last day, but nevertheless still at one of the weakest we've seen year to date. Let's open our markets here, shall we? A bit of a bump up by 0.3%. Finally, after we did see a couple of days sliding down here, and we are still, of course, on the upward trend, moving towards the 7,300 levels, which we had broken in last week. Let's take a look at the movers here of the morning. We are 8 minutes into trade. AC Energy, best performer of the day. That's up by 2.6%, followed by Robinsons and Converge. But on the downside, you've got maybe 5 stocks in the red here. SM Prime dragging the index down. That's down by 1.12%, followed by San Miguel Corporation, and a couple of other holdings companies, AEV and SM Investments. And one to be watching out for here, let's take a look at Meralco. Of course, after they had released their earnings after trading had closed yesterday, they are enjoying a bump up of 0.3% to 294 pesos and 40 centavos. This, of course, as we had reported yesterday, their third quarter net income was up by 49% to the tune of 6.57 billion pesos. They mentioned that in the 9 months of the year, the factory power sales were already back to 2019 levels. Industrial sales were driving that. Semiconductor, cement, steel, food, and drinks. And still on the MVP group of companies, just one to be checking out for here, PXP. That's as Pangilinan pushes the South China Sea Oil deal this year. He said that this will become slimmer if no deal is reached this year. Recall that there has been on and off talks between PXP and CNOOC. But he did mention that prospect is dimming, especially as we will have elections in May of 2022. He did mention developing the local energy sources is more important as the commodity prices begin to rise. Here are the other headlines. We're keeping our eyes on the Bangko Sentral is considering testing 1,000 peso banknotes made of a more durable polymer. That's next year. That's on top of looking at how limited testing circulation of these polymer banknotes could impact the domestic abaca industry, since the material has been used for peso bills since 2001. If the plan pushes through, these limited polymer banknotes will coexist with the paper bills. The BSP noted that polymer banknotes are difficult to counterfeit due to the complexity of their printed images and advanced security features. The central bank added that this was also prompted by the UK and Australia reporting that polymer banknotes are less likely to host bacteria and can last up to 4 times compared to paper money. And this from the Philippine Star, NEDA expects Metro Manila to gain over 14 billion pesos in additional economic output until the end of this month. That is on the back of the downgrade of the region to Alert Level 3 in October. NEDA Secretary Carl Kendrick Chua said the de-escalation from Alert Level 4 to 3 will result in additional output worth 7.1 billion pesos per week. Meanwhile, the Foundation for Economic Freedom says NCR is ready for another downgrade next month. But the foundation adds that vigilance must be retained to contain the virus, and a total approach is needed for further safe reopening, which includes booster shots, mass testing, masks, and increased health capacity. With a ballooning budget deficit and shortage of drugs, how can we ensure drug security with the least dent to the economy? Here to chat with us, we have Dr. Maria Teresa Dioco. She's the Country Medical Director and National Ecosystems Lead at Roche Philippines. Good morning, Doctora, and welcome to Business World Live.
Good morning, Danny. Thank you very much for having me here.
Ma'am, let's take a step back this morning. Just as a medical practitioner, are you happy with the country's pandemic response, the vaccination program, the choice of vaccines combined with immunotherapy drugs, and the general rollout?
I think the our government is doing the best that it can in order to be able to address the crisis that we are facing right now in terms of COVID-19. It is a pandemic. It is global, and I think we are definitely trying as much as possible to address uh, the different aspects of the pandemic response.
Okay, ma'am, for transparency for our viewers here, Roche, of course, is the manufacturer of several drugs that are addressing, anti-inflammatory drug. For example, tocilizumab. I'm trying to pronounce it properly. These are DOH, WHO approved drugs. These have been widely used. And the issue here, according to the DOH at least, is there has been shortages of these drugs. What is the status now as the manufacturer? Have you been able to address the production pain points?
I think, Danny, to begin with, maybe let's put it a little bit in context. Since the start of the pandemic, Roche has been doing the best that it can, including all its employees, working day and night to address the need for tocilizumab. In fact, we have gone into studies to see the effect or the usefulness of this in this pandemic, and and we have tried to supply the where the need is. So this means a 300% increase in terms of supplying lower and middle income countries for this for this particular drug. For the Philippines, we have provided more than 500 times the pre-pandemic supply
Mhm.
for
Okay.
tocilizumab. And we are doing the best we can by partnering with different um, uh, other manufacturers who have the capability to produce in a quality and safety parameters that is acceptable so that we are able to respond to this pandemic.
Okay, so you're saying, ma'am, that there's no real issue when it comes to the manufacturing and production side. Have you been partnering with the Department of Health in order to increase the budget? Of course, we've been focusing a lot on the vaccine rollout, on the vaccine procurement. How has the budget been for procuring these other types of drugs?
What I'm saying, Danny, is that actually there is a global need to supply tocilizumab. And this is being addressed, and we hope that the supply, we expect that with the various partnerships and, of course, the transfer of technology, the increase in efficiencies that we are trying to do, we will be able to have uh, we'll be able to better address the supply for tocilizumab by the end of the year or at the beginning of next year. So, in terms of working with the government, I believe that the government has done greatly in terms of looking at the different options that are out there. And this would include the new medicines, not just the ones such as tocilizumab, but even the new ones that have been coming in, such as monoclonal antibodies. I think it has also been in the news that other medicines, as you said, that are used for this has been already approved with an EUA by our FDA. So this one is casirivimab and imdevimab. So it was in the news at the start of October. What I do believe is that we do need to further, I guess, ensure that there is a budget allotted for treatments.
Okay,
So
ma'am.
it's not just
Speaking
vaccines, but also treatments.
Correct.
Yes.
Speaking po of budget, just for our understanding, how expensive are these drugs for the typical consumer? Are these usually covered in health plans, especially since we had also reported weeks ago that there's been a rise in the black market for these types of drugs with quite exorbitant prices. The government has in fact tried to put an SRP to this. How does this affect the consumers, and what should be the right approach?
Well, the government right now is doing its best to be able to provide for the COVID needs of the country, which includes case rates for COVID diseases. So, what happens is that the medicines are actually evaluated by the what we call the Health Technology Advisory Council. And then these are then uh, said to be or made to be eligible in terms of being covered by both the Philippine Health Insurance Corporation, so that it is not to be borne out of pocket by the Filipino patient. And this we have seen is the course of most of the countries in globally, and it's one of the reasons why we also champion universal healthcare in the country.
Okay, so these should be, in theory, covered by the government, but of course we have
Well,
this
it
issue of the budget deficit gap also, and where they put their funds.
yes, it
Ma'am,
depends on prioritization as well as approvals in the for health technology assessments.
okay, ma'am, what is the role of Roche here in the Philippines specifically? What and are you particularly trying to achieve? Is there a possibility for us to have local production capabilities when it comes to producing drugs here? Are you how are you helping in this fight? Are there donation drives, programs for the needy in the country?
Thank you for that question, Danny. So Roche in the Philippines primarily is a bringing a bring it brings forward innovation. So that is why we try as much as possible to bring to the country the different forms of medicines that can be used as an option for both doctors and of course as an option for patients. At the same time, we also are producers of tests, and we continually advocate for the role of testing in our environment, and we know that testing has a specific role in terms of making sure that there is also limited or a containment, or get number one, containment of the virus should one person be affected, but also ensuring that you address the disease if it is there. So in terms of helping the Philippines, I think as much we do have, together with the industry, we do have what we are formulating with the Department of Trade and Industry, what we call a roadmap for the pharmaceutical industry in the Philippines. And in this industry, particular advocacy of Roche is improving the clinical research arena in the country, which will, of course, help us to bring in more innovation as well as bringing in jobs for our fellow Filipino, and also improving the state of basically science and what our country can do.
Okay, so that's also in the education side as well and skill sets of the Filipinos. Hopefully,
Yes,
ma'am, before
we
we
have
let you
clinical
yes,
researchers. We have
researchers,
clinical researchers as an industry as well. Thank you.
and of course we have these programs with the DTI for balik scientists,
The
and hopefully we
DTI,
will have more people
yes.
in this field as well. Ma'am, before we let
Also
you
the
go,
DOST. Yes, thank you.
you had also mentioned po in your presentation to the Chamber of Commerce, the ECCP, that there may be less need for critical care if the government, or at least we have these drugs more on hand. And this might be a solution to being able to reopen the economy. In your opinion, are we at that stage already? Of course, we're, pondering whether we can be downgraded even more and ease the restrictions even more, or to what extent are you saying, okay, we need to have a certain amount of drugs yet still before we can start thinking of the economy?
I think it's always a balance, Danny, and I appreciate the government for acknowledging this. So it is just the need of one group, but the need of all. So for for from my perspective, it is important to note that we are, number one, addressing the need for vaccination. Number two, looking at testing, and I believe that the government can also, and even the private sector can work together even more to make testing even more available and accessible to the Filipinos. And thirdly, the availability of treatment. So with all of that being balanced, I believe that the country is definitely needs to move forward, but not with just one moving forward, not just health or economy pushing forward, but having that particular balance in it.
Okay, thank you so much for those insights, Dr. Maria Teresa Dioco, Country Medical Director and National Ecosystems Lead at Roche Philippines.
Thank you, Danny.
And that's a first look into the business day. Today's Tuesday, October 26, 2021. Catch Business World Live for the market close at 3:15 p.m. today. I'm Danie Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.